Life is finite. Death is inevitable. How we approach these uncomfortable truths often defines us, and religion, art, politics, and culture have wrestled with them for as long as we've been able to recognize them. Outer Wilds is a game concerned specifically with examining the various ways we try to cope with mortality, with facts about the universe that are simply inexorable, unalterable, irresistible, no matter how much we might wish they weren't. A disclaimer, this video is chock full of spoilers for the game and lore of Outer Wilds. If you haven't played and completed that game already, I recommend doing so before you watch this video. Outer Wilds is a wonderful, beautiful, thoughtful, and thought-provoking game whose beauty lies in the exploration of the universe contained within it, and it really deserves to be played spoiler-free. That being understood, let's get into it. Outer Wilds is a game about the end of the universe. It's not clear that this is what the game's about at first. At first, it seems to be a game about spaceflight and about exploring ancient mysteries, and it is that. But what those mysteries reveal are a series of tragic revelations about the cold and seemingly uncaring nature of our universe. One that doesn't really concern itself with our fate. One that will keep on going once we're gone. One that will, itself, someday die. The protagonist of Outer Wilds, who we'll call Self from here on out, is trapped in a 22-minute-long time loop, like Groundhog Day in space, and at the end of each loop, the local star erupts into a supernova, destroying everything and killing Self. Luckily, any knowledge gained in a previous loop is retained in later ones, so most of the game is spent revisiting the same locations over and over again, trying to learn as much as is possible about the solar system in which Self lives, about the long-extinct race that once lived there previously, about the cause of the supernova, and perhaps about a means of preventing it. And ultimately, after dozens of iterations, hours spent exploring, and after obtaining a wealth of information about the fate of the ancient Nomai and the nature of the universe itself, you fail. You learn that the sun's destruction is just the natural consequence of its age. It's reached the end of its life cycle. There's no preventing the destruction. There's no escaping it. Worse, you learn that the universe itself is reaching the end of its life. It's not merely your own star that's dying, but every star. The universe itself is beginning to wind down, and sooner rather than later, everything is going to end. No matter what you do, even with a time loop at your disposal, you and everyone you know are eventually doomed. This cannot be changed. But this also should not be surprising. All of us are mortal. All of us will witness the end of the universe, at least the universe as we know it. And most of us will face that end in less than 100 short years. The uncomfortable truth that must be faced in Outer Wilds is the same uncomfortable truth that all of us must face someday. Life is finite. Death is inevitable. The bell tolls for thee. No matter how hard one tries, the universe cannot be changed. However, we can change. Change is in our very nature. Our attitudes, our thoughts, our approach, all of these can be changed. And so, since we're faced with a situation that cannot be changed, the only possible action one can take is to decide the answer to this question. How shall I face my own mortality? The various characters in Outer Wilds approach this question in very different ways. The travelers, scattered throughout the solar system, each have their own approaches to the question of their own impending mortality. Esker is the first traveler most players will meet, and they live on the Adelrock, akin to our own moon. Esker is, like Self, a Harthian, who are a relatively young race just taking their first steps into a wider cosmos. Esker was one of the first Harthian astronauts, but they've been left behind and forgotten. Their home on Adelrock was once a bustling hub of activity until improvements in technology meant that ships no longer had to stop there for maintenance. Esker is lonely and very rarely has visitors, but it seems that Esker has always been lonely. A photograph featuring the first Harthian astronauts has all of their signatures, including Esker's, but notably lacks Esker's actual inclusion. Perhaps Esker was taking the photo themselves. Perhaps they were left out, treated as an afterthought back then as they are today. Esker can easily be seen to represent aging. Left behind by a world that has passed them by, they're longing for a return to the days where they were once seen as useful. They are still useful, but few seem to recognize this, and so they've been left on their own, simply waiting and longing until the end. Esker has themselves seemed to have accepted this fate. Unlike the other first astronauts who've become mentors and teachers to the latest generation of explorers, they remain in isolation on their moon. Though they complain about their loneliness, they never bother to return home and confront the society that has abandoned them. This could be said to represent an avoidance of the uncomfortable truth of what their aging actually means. Chert is an astronomer, and one of the few characters who comes to realize these truths about the impending end of the universe without player interaction. And their reaction to this knowledge is disbelief, anger, dismay, and despair. Living on Ember Twin, they're very close to the sun, and so they are able to witness its change through the course of each cycle. If you talk with them early on in a cycle, they're dismissive of the idea that the sun is dying, but later on they begin noticing the abnormal number of supernovas in the sky and begin to get concerned. If you visit them late in a loop, they're near panic with the realization that their own sun is next, and furious that their life's work has been wasted. In the moments leading up to the supernova at the end of the loop, they fall into a depression, able to do nothing more than wait for the end to come. If you inform Chert of your own discoveries that the wider universe itself is dying, they break down completely, and any further dialogue is impossible with them for the rest of that loop. Chert could be said to represent anger at fate. They're furious at the injustice of it all, at the end of what should have been a triumphant career, at such a horrible revelation being revealed by the very science in which they are so well versed. But unlike the kind of anger that spurs one to action, it is an unproductive anger that burns impotently and cannot be sustained. By the end of each loop, they're drained and unable to do more than passively sit and await the end, and they can even fall into an unrecoverable despair. Rybeck, on the other hand, represents fear. Rybeck, who is living on Brittle Hollow, is an astronaut who's afraid of space. They're afraid of falling, afraid of fire, afraid of almost everything, and it seems that they've only succeeded as well as they have through sheer luck. But despite their fear, Rybeck continues exploring because Rybeck is an archaeologist who is passionate about their vocation. They love discovering hidden truths and long-forgotten knowledge, and their desire to learn more about the long-extinct Nomai is enough to overcome their fear of the dangers of space travel. They react passionately to every discovery you report, and while they remain nervous, they're also excited about the possibilities for new adventures. If Chert's fear drove them to anger and despair, Rybeck, who is no less afraid, has chosen to continue to act despite fear, to continue to explore and learn about the world around themselves. Even in the face of mortal dangers, Rybeck chooses to continue to strive and learn, because Rybeck has found a purpose beyond mere survival. Feldspar is a daredevil, and an incredibly accomplished pilot. Feldspar is also incredibly accomplished at crashing. Feldspar lacks Rybeck's fear and rushes headlong into dangers. Certainly, Feldspar must understand mortality, having been faced with it time and time again. But Feldspar laughs in the face of mortality and willingly seeks out new and ever more terrifying dangers, ultimately losing their ship and crashing on Dark Bramble. But even when Self offers to have a rescue team come pick Feldspar up, they aren't really in any rush to be rescued. They're perfectly happy continuing their rough and tumble lifestyle out on their own. Feldspar could represent denial. Instead of confronting fear, Feldspar simply ignores it. Instead of thinking about mortality, Feldspar mocks it. Feldspar is lucky and talented, but one must conclude that eventually their luck will run out, and Feldspar will go to their fate without ever really wrestling with it in any meaningful way. They'll certainly have a lot of fun along the way, though. Gabbro is the only Hearthian besides Self who's aware of the time loop, yet their response to it is far different than Self's. Gabbro is laid back, relaxed. Gabbro isn't really concerned about why this is happening and is happy to simply relax on their new island home on Giant's Deep. Gabbro is likewise aware of the impending supernova, but seeing no obvious way to avert it, has chosen to simply enjoy what little time is remaining. This is typical for Gabbro, who, when faced with the mystery of Giant's Deep's core, tried everything they could think of to reach it, and gave up after only thinking of two things. Gabbro can represent acceptance, but it's a passive acceptance, one that sees no use for further action. I find it interesting that these various approaches can be seen as somewhat, though not perfectly, parallel to the stages of grief represented in the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. Certainly we see obvious anger, denial, depression, and even acceptance, and some of Feldspar and Rybek's behaviors could be seen to fit into the bargaining stage. This is appropriate since Outer Wilds is ultimately concerned with death, albeit on a universal scale. Running parallel to these reactions is the slowly revealed story of the Nomai, a race of space explorers who came to this solar system hundreds of thousands of years ago. Each Nomai vessel was piloted by a different clan, and the vessel of Escal's clan received a signal that was somehow older than the universe itself. Excited at the prospect for a new discovery, they immediately warped to that signal without even bothering to send a message to the other Nomai across the universe first. Escal's vessel arrived in our solar system, but the strange way in which Dark Bramble warped space and signals led to their vessel crashing deep within that planet, mortally damaged, with only 3 escape pods being able to launch. Only 2 of those pods escaped Dark Bramble, and the 3rd was lost there, along with their vessel. The 2 surviving pods landed on Ember Twin and Brittle Hollow, and these surviving Nomai struggled to survive, but eventually built a new civilization, finally getting back in contact with each other and getting back to work locating that signal that had brought them there in the first place, a signal they came to call the Eye of the Universe. The Nomai can represent perseverance, but they also bordered on obsession. Their quest for the Eye became the cornerstone for their society, and all technology was geared towards finding out exactly where it is and reaching it. The quantum moon, which sometimes orbits it, became the focus of their rite of passage, their gateway to adulthood. It seems that all of their science and philosophy were focused upon their quest to find the Eye of the Universe, to the extent that they ultimately developed a form of time travel that could be only powered by a literal supernova in order to find the Eye. Their path was littered with numerous failures, yet after each failure they resolved to continue trying, striking off along new directions of inquiry, but always towards that one goal, convinced that the Eye had signaled them specifically and wanted to be found. While their dedication and refusal to give up is admirable, some among them wondered at the wisdom of continuing their endless search. Some wondered if the Eye might be malevolent, having lured them in intentionally to crash at Dark Bramble. Others wondered if the Eye even knew of them at all, or was even alive in the first place, and feared that the signal they had followed was never meant for them at all. Most Nomai, however, were convinced that their fate was inexorably tied to that of the Eye, and developed an almost religious fervor towards finding it. Knowing that the Eye had to exist somewhere far out in the solar system where it would be almost impossible to find, they finally settled on a plan that involved creating a time loop so that they could fire the same probe thousands of times in every possible direction in the hopes of eventually finding it. They would then cause a supernova to power their time device, sending the data back to the beginning of the loop so the probe could be fired again in a different direction. This seems pretty extreme, but they were confident that this method must eventually locate the eye of the universe. After which, on the final loop, they'd simply not explode the sun, and time would then continue as normal. Still, the risks involved in such a venture made a lot of Nomai very nervous, and even wonder whether they were going too far with their obsession. Ultimately, this plan failed as well, because the weapon they built to explode the sun just didn't work. Dispirited, the Nomai finally decided to take a break from their ceaseless quest for the eye, choosing instead to investigate a new comet that was entering the system. Perhaps this exploration might rekindle their old passion for knowledge and discovery, and give them a purpose beyond their ceaseless quest for the eye. For the first time, the Nomai seemed to move towards an attitude of acceptance, but a healthy acceptance that begins to explore new plans, one that moves on with life. The Nomai all died soon afterwards when the core of the comet exploded, scattering toxic material throughout the system and killing them all off instantly. They left behind only ruins and bones, and their newly found sense of acceptance died with them. The other Nomai clans abroad in the universe never knew the fate of Escal's clan, classifying their disappearance as a mystery, and later being far more concerned with what they recognized as the impending death of the universe. They all decided to head for a younger galaxy, one that might survive for a bit longer, but this would merely be staving off the inevitable. Like their kin that came to our solar system, they persevered, but their perseverance was little more than a form of denial itself. One of Escal's clan did survive in a way. Self is able to read much about Solanum, a young Nomai who ultimately reaches the age where she can go on her own pilgrimage to the quantum moon. Following her path, Self is finally able to reach the moon themselves, only to find Solanum's bones, an abandoned ship. However, upon traveling with the moon to its 6th location in orbit around the eye of the universe, Self is able to meet Solanum, somehow also alive after hundreds of thousands of years. Solanum understands that she's not truly alive, but is happy to meet Self and to share what she knows with them. But Solanum is a prisoner, trapped in a state neither alive nor dead and locked into a single location. Solanum is the biggest example of denial in the game, someone who should have died at least 200,000 years before, but who refuses to do so. The life she clings to is an empty one, merely half a life, locked in a quantum and timeless state and unable to affect the universe beyond in any measurable way. We've seen anger, denial, bargaining, and depression all demonstrated by the various characters of Outer Wilds. The final stage of grief in the Kubler-Ross cycle is acceptance. But this doesn't mean the kind of depressed acceptance demonstrated by Chert, or even the relaxed calm demonstrated by Gabbro. Acceptance, according to Kubler-Ross, means exploring new options, moving on with life, putting new plans into place. In the face of mortality, this means that life goes on. And if it's going on without us, that means leaving something behind for those that survive us. If we're all going to die, all that will remain of us is memories and the effect our actions had on others. If we're going to have to leave this life, the only choice we really have is what we leave behind. What kind of world are we going to leave for those who come after us? What kind of legacy are we creating? What kind of world will our children grow up in? As I approached the end of the game, and as the nature of the end became more clear, I found myself passing through some of the stages of the Kubler-Ross cycle myself. I stopped playing for a day, wanting to put off the end as long as possible, denying the end. I was saddened by the realization that I wasn't going to be able to save the solar system, and that whatever waited for me at the eye wasn't going to be the happy ending I had been expecting. But ultimately, I had no choice, and I had to accept that what was going to happen was going to happen. I had to confront acceptance. To complete Outer Wilds, Self has to break the time loop. This means removing the power source for the device that loops time. This means that the next time the sun explodes, and this is inevitable, their life will end, along with the lives of everyone they know and love. But allowing this to happen is the only way to move forward, to finally visit the eye itself, and to potentially leave something behind for others. The game is about the end of the universe, so there isn't anyone left to leave something behind for, but it's a metaphor for life itself. In real life, there are always others who will come after us, and rather than cling to our own lives and comforts at all costs, we should consider their needs as well. What kind of world are we leaving for them? Of course, when we're dealing with the weird and often misunderstood world of quantum mechanics, lots of things are possible. In a video game, anything is possible, and the end of the game sees all of the travelers and Solanum together making music, now with a willingness to accept what must come to pass, and singing into existence a new universe. This is a universe that Self will not be able to participate in, but Self's actions will allow it to come into being so that new life will exist, and new people will be able to live and explore and learn just as they once did. This is Self's legacy, letting the old universe die so that a new one can be born, letting go of life so that new life can thrive. This is acceptance, devoid of anger, depression, denial, and even bargaining. It is sad. Yes, it is bittersweet. But it is also triumphant. And it is inevitable. The only thing we have to choose is how we react to it.